Ukraine, where Joseph Lindsley is. And Joe, looking at various reports from Ukraine today, air raid alerts in Kyiv City, where you are, is it all quiet?
At the moment, Bob, good afternoon from Lviv. At the moment, it is quiet in Kyiv. But earlier today, while leaders of several African nations were visiting Kyiv, including the South African president, Cyril Ramaphosa, they had just arrived in Kyiv. And a little bit after 11 o'clock, quite astoundingly to many people, Russia attacked Kyiv, the strongest attack on the capital in several weeks. There were 6 of the supersonic missiles, which really can only be stopped by the American-made Patriot missile defense system, and 6 other caliber missiles, while these African leaders were on the streets of Kyiv. And, this has never happened when NATO leaders visit Ukraine. When they're in Kyiv, there were never attacks on the capital. But when countries not protected by NATO, and maybe countries for whom Putin thinks he can push them around, but it's pretty astounding to imagine Prime Minister of Egypt, President of South Africa, and others in shelter while the city was being shook by this attack today.
And there's no way that the Russians don't know that that's taking place at that time and place, right?
No, yeah, this visit was public, and in fact, these leaders are going to Moscow, I think tomorrow, because their mission, they think that they can figure out some peace deal between the two countries, and maybe their eyes will be opened by what they witnessed today. It really is. I mean, it just shows the audacity, I think, of the Russians and how they think they can push around other countries, and then meanwhile, there's that the toll is increasing. I mean, these are very heavy days. And last night, amid many meetings, I was walking by a cafe, and I saw a girl I know in the cafe, and I go inside, and she was crying. And that is, when you see that, you know what's happened. And so I sort of paused for a few seconds and approached her. There was a crowd of people had formed around her, and she just looked at me with tears in her eyes, and she said, "Oleq is dead." And Oleq was a friend of many people here in Lviv, a philosopher and a poet. I think at the same cafe, the Cafe Fatsetka, in January, when Ukrainians celebrate Christmas, that was the last time I saw Oleq, and everyone was there singing songs, and he was on a small break from fighting. And so that it's a reminder that when you see people, you don't know. I mean, this is a reminder for anyone in human life, but especially it's intense here in Ukraine. You don't know when you'll see people again. And afterward, outside of this cafe on the cobbled streets of Lviv, about 7 of us were just sitting at a table. Everyone was in total silence. And it was a cool June evening, and maybe 5 minutes with no one said a word. And then after 5 minutes, someone mentioned a personality trait of Oleq, and then everyone laughed, and then returned to silence. And it went on like that for some time. And then earlier in the day, I'd been working with a friend on raising money to get trucks to soldiers at the front lines, and then we had a lot of logistics to manage. And then he texted me and said he was going to be offline for 24 hours. His brother-in-law was dead. Today, I texted a woman I know. I said, "How are you?" And she said, "Empty." She had news that a friend had died, and then she was trying to decide if she would spend time with her father, who was on a small break from fighting, or go to the funeral. And she decided it was better to spend time with the living while you have the chance. When you hear stories like this,
go ahead, Joseph. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, and then even through all this, the resolve is not lessened. And in these conversations yesterday, there was a French journalist, and he was, asking why is everyone so angry at the Russians, and why can't you negotiate? And you say, well, look at these stories all around us. And one of the Ukrainians there said, "Democracy is like food. Without it, we will die." And that resolve is never lost. And then I just saw that on Facebook 4 days ago, Oleq, who was killed, one of the many who's been killed recently, he shared his last post, and he liked to translate songs from around the world into Ukrainian. And so he translated these words from a bossa nova tune from I can't pronounce the Portuguese very well, but Vinicius de Moraes, and the words, which I've translated back into English, are, "You can also return on purpose for me to the same places, to the same bars. You can dream of a better night, So where are you? And that is, I mean, it was straight. Those are the last words he posted online, and that's, you know, as you walk around the streets of every Ukrainian city, there are people, you know, disappearing as they give their lives in this absolutely intense fight. And that's why, as I mentioned yesterday, there was that very powerful story by the young woman volunteer, and she said, you know, we can never have rose-colored lenses as we look at the reality here. You know, we have to resist. Ukrainians, she said, have to resist propaganda at home and never be too confident. And so there is this new sense of avoiding complacency and really making sure everyone has the supplies they need, you know, life-saving supplies and drones and medical kits to at least try to mitigate some of these losses.
When you hear stories about individuals like Oleq, it somehow gets to you even more than when you hear a report of dozens of people killed. Those single stories that you're telling this morning are really emotional, and I can feel it. And meanwhile, the Kremlin says that Putin is open to solving what he calls the Ukrainian problem. He says it can be solved in many ways, and he supports any set of ideas to end the conflict. Is this any kind of change in his public position?
No, I mean, it's sort of what he's been saying all along, and you know what the terms include is Ukraine giving up its territory, which, you know, what that really means is Ukrainians being forced to live under Russian occupation, you know, to live in a place with no freedom, and so. This is what the African leaders are, you know, they're hoping that they can. But, you know, South Africa participated in war games with Russia not long ago. So they're not really on Ukraine's side. But, I mean, even if, you know, as heavy as the spirit is in Lviv right now, for example, you know, everyone is all the more resolved. They never want to live in a Russian society. They don't want to live in a land of tyranny. And so that's for Ukrainians, that's the only, you know, unless until the Russians are not only until the Russians are gone, but until they have no more ability to attack, and that, you know, and that's a hard thing for a lot of people in the West to realize. But you know, Moscow has to be, as Russia loves to say about Ukraine, Moscow has to be demilitarized. You know, the Kremlin said they were on a campaign to I can't even say that
militarize,
word,
we know.
Denazify. Yes, thank you, Bob. Ukraine. But the irony is they have militarized Ukraine. Ukraine had a very small military and not much, you know, not many resources for fighting, and now they're militarized, and it's only out of necessity. And so, as we continue to see these atrocities, and this is, you know, I just saw a post from the chief rabbi of Ukraine, who was almost killed. He was down in Kherson last week, and he was almost killed in the shelling. And so, you know, from the chief rabbi to Oleq, the philosopher, to all these different people, you have a nation united against the Kremlin propaganda and against their ongoing tyranny.
It'll be interesting to hear what Putin has to say today. He is speaking at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, and they say there are unprecedented security measures being taken there. Well, we will continue to have you in our thoughts this weekend, Joseph, and we'll talk Monday.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you
Until
very much.
Monday.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for introducing Ukraine on your social media pages. That's very important, that much more people can get more information about the situation here and how everybody can help Ukraine to stay stronger and to save all the world.
Что он сказал?
Well, which side are you on?
На чьей ты стороне?
Come on now. Oh, which side are you on?
На чьей ты стороне?
Ебать.